The gates of Buckingham Palace stood silent on that cold February morning in 2026, but behind those iron bars, history was about to repeat itself in the most unexpected way. Prince Harry, the once beloved royal rebel who had walked away from everything he was born to inherit, was coming home, not as the prodigal son seeking forgiveness, but as a man carrying secrets that could reshape the monarchy forever. The world had been watching for nearly 6 years since Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, building their new life across the Atlantic. But what the cameras didn't capture, what the headlines missed, was the quiet desperation that had been growing in Harry's heart. Phone calls that went unanswered, letters that were returned unopened, a father battling cancer who refused to see his youngest son. As Harry's car approached the palace that February day, the royal guards stood at attention, their faces masks of trained indifference. Yet each of them knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The prince who had once been third in line to the throne, who had served his country in Afghanistan, who had walked behind his mother's coffin as the world wept, was returning to a family that had seemingly erased him from their lives. But this wasn't just about Harry's homecoming. Thousands of miles away in California, Meghan Markle was making decisions that would either heal a fractured royal family or destroy what remained of the House of Windsor forever. The chess pieces were moving, and the game that had started with a fairy tale wedding was entering its final, most dangerous phase. What happened in those palace walls during Harry's 2026 visit would either write the most beautiful chapter of royal reconciliation in modern history, or pen the final pages of a dynasty that had survived wars, scandals, and centuries of change. The guards knew it. The palace staff whispered about it. And somewhere in the depths of those ancient corridors, the weight of 1,000 years of royal tradition hung in the balance. This is the story of what really happened when Harry came home, and why Meghan's next move would determine not just their future, but the very survival of the British royal family as the world knew it. The morning mist hung heavy over London as Harry's black Range Rover wound through the familiar streets toward Buckingham Palace. It had been 18 months since he last set foot on British soil, and the city seemed different somehow, as if it had moved on without him. The driver, a man Harry didn't recognize, maintained professional silence throughout the journey. But Harry caught him glancing in the rearview mirror more than once, perhaps wondering what thoughts occupied the mind of the prince who had chosen exile over duty. Harry pressed his palm against the cool window and watched ordinary people beginning their day. A mother pushing a stroller, rushing to catch the morning bus. Office workers clutching coffee cups, their faces buried in their phones. Life continuing its relentless march forward, while his own seemed suspended in an endless loop of regret and determination. These people had opinions about him, he knew. Some sympathetic, others harsh. The British public had been divided ever since he and Meghan made their dramatic exit from royal life in 2020. The past 6 years had been a whirlwind of unprecedented events for the royal family. Queen Elizabeth II's death in 2022 had shaken the very foundations of the monarchy, and King Charles III's subsequent battle with cancer had thrust the institution into uncertainty. Harry had learned of his grandmother's passing through a phone call from a palace aide, not from his father or brother. The funeral had been a carefully choreographed affair where Harry stood meters away from his family, yet felt like an ocean separated them. Now, Charles's health had taken another turn for the worse. The details were closely guarded, but Harry's sources within the palace staff painted a grim picture. The king, who had waited decades to assume the throne, might have only months left to wear the crown he had so long desired. It was this news that had finally prompted Harry to break his silence and reach out to his father's private secretary, requesting an audience. The response had been swift but cold. A formal letter stating that His Majesty would see Prince Harry at Buckingham Palace on February 15th at 10:30 a.m. No warmth, no personal touch, just the rigid formality that Harry remembered all too well from his youth. But beneath that official language, Harry detected something else. Hope, perhaps, or maybe desperation. A dying king seeking reconciliation with his estranged son. As they approached the palace gates, Harry's mind drifted to Meghan. She had been adamant that this trip should happen, even though it meant leaving her and their 2 children in Montecito for an indefinite period. Their marriage had weathered storms that would have destroyed most relationships. The relentless media scrutiny, the legal battles, the constant speculation about their finances and their future. Yet through it all, Meghan had remained his anchor, the voice of reason, when his own emotions threatened to overwhelm him. Their last conversation before his departure had been particularly intense. Meghan had held his face in her hands, her eyes searching his for any sign of doubt. "You need to do this for yourself, not for them," she had said. "Go with an open heart. But don't let them manipulate you into feeling guilty for choosing our family's happiness over their traditions." The children had been confused by his sudden departure. Archie, now 7, had asked why Daddy couldn't just call Grandpa Charles on FaceTime like he did with other family members. Lilibet, 5 and fiercely protective of her father, had declared that she would come with him to make sure the mean people didn't hurt Daddy's feelings. Their innocence only made Harry's mission more urgent. They deserved to know their grandfather, their uncle, their cousins. They deserved to understand their heritage, even if that heritage came with complications. The palace loomed ahead, its familiar facade triggering a flood of memories. Harry had spent countless hours of his childhood within those walls, playing in corridors that tourists would never see, attending formal dinners where children were expected to be silent observers of adult politics. He remembered the weight of responsibility that had settled on his shoulders after Diana's death, the constant awareness that his every move was being watched, analyzed, and judged. The car passed through the gates, and Harry noticed the royal guards standing at attention. Their faces were expressionless, trained to reveal nothing of their thoughts or feelings. But Harry knew some of these men. He had served alongside soldiers just like them in Afghanistan. He understood the discipline required to stand motionless while history unfolded around them. Yet today he sensed something different in their bearing, an awareness that this moment carried more weight than the usual comings and goings of palace life. Sir Edward Young, the Queen's former private secretary, who had stayed on to assist King Charles, was waiting at the entrance. His greeting was cordial but measured, a careful balance between respect for Harry's royal status and acknowledgement of his current outsider position. "Your Royal Highness," he said with a slight bow. "His Majesty is waiting in the audience room." The walk through the palace corridors was surreal. Every painting, every piece of furniture, every architectural detail was exactly as Harry remembered, yet everything felt foreign. The silence was particularly striking. In his youth, these halls had bustled with activity. Courtiers hurrying between meetings, staff preparing for state functions, the constant hum of a working palace. Now the atmosphere felt subdued, almost melancholy. They passed the room where Harry had played as a child while his mother attended meetings. He could almost see her there, Diana's radiant smile lighting up the formal surroundings as she broke protocol to hug her sons. The memory was both comforting and painful. Diana had always believed that the monarchy needed to modernize, to connect more authentically with the people it served. Her death had frozen those reforms in place, leaving Harry to wonder what might have been different if she had lived to guide his father's reign. Sir Edward paused outside the audience room. "Your Royal Highness," he said quietly. "Before we proceed, I feel obligated to mention that His Majesty has been quite weak lately. The treatments have taken their toll. He tires easily, and his doctors have advised limiting visitors." Harry nodded, absorbing this information. His father, once so vigorous and passionate about his causes, reduced to a frail figure requiring medical monitoring. The irony wasn't lost on him. Charles had spent his entire life preparing to be king, only to have his reign overshadowed by illness and family discord. "I understand," Harry replied. "I'm not here to cause stress. I just want to talk to my father." Sir Edward's expression softened slightly. "He's been looking forward to seeing you, Your Royal Highness, more than he would admit publicly." The door opened, and Harry stepped inside. The audience room was smaller than he remembered, though no less formal. Tall windows looked out onto the palace gardens, where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom despite the February chill. And there, seated in a high-backed chair that seemed to dwarf his frame, was King Charles III. The man Harry saw bore little resemblance to the robust figure who had walked behind the Queen's coffin just 18 months earlier. Charles's face was gaunt, his skin pale with the telltale signs of someone undergoing intensive medical treatment. But his eyes, those familiar eyes that had watched Harry grow from a rebellious child into a man, still held their characteristic intensity. "Harry," Charles said, his voice hoarse but warm. It was the first time in years that his father had addressed him by his childhood name rather than his formal title. "Dad," Harry replied, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the years of silence and misunderstanding. Here was the King of England and his estranged son, but more fundamentally, here was a father and his child, trying to bridge a gap that had seemed insurmountable. Charles gestured to a chair positioned near his own. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss, and I'm afraid my energy isn't what it once was." As Harry took his seat, he noticed a small side table bearing photographs. His wedding to Meghan, Archie's christening, even a recent photo of Lilibet that could only have been obtained through unofficial channels. His father had been watching from afar, keeping track of his grandchildren's lives despite their estrangement. "You look well," Charles said, though Harry could hear the effort it took for him to speak clearly. "California has been good to you." "Thank you," Harry replied carefully. "How are you feeling?" Charles waved a dismissive hand. Dying men aren't supposed to complain about their health. It's rather poor form. Despite everything, Harry found himself smiling at his father's dry humor. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both men aware that this conversation could be their last chance to address the wounds that had divided their family. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the historic reconciliation beginning within the palace walls. Charles leaned forward slightly. "I need to tell you something, Harry. Something that might change how you view everything that's happened between us." Harry felt his heart rate increase. His father's tone suggested that whatever revelation was coming would be significant. "The day you and Meghan announced your decision to step back from royal duties," Charles continued, "I was actually proud of you." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. "What?" "You had the courage to choose your family's happiness over duty. That's something I never managed to do." Charles's eyes grew distant. "I spent decades trapped in a marriage that brought neither of us joy, following protocols that seemed more important than people. You broke that cycle." Harry struggled to process this admission. His entire understanding of his father's reaction to his departure was being rewritten. "Then why," Harry asked, "did you cut off my security? Why did you stop taking my calls?" Charles closed his eyes, and for a moment, Harry worried that the emotional strain might be too much for his father's weakened state. When Charles opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Because I was terrified that if I supported your decision publicly, it would be seen as the monarchy giving up. The institution was already fragile after your grandmother's death. I thought I had to choose between being your father and being the king." The honesty in Charles's voice was devastating. Harry realized that his father had been as trapped by circumstance as he had been, making impossible choices between personal desires and public duty. "I've spent the last 6 years regretting that decision," Charles continued, "watching my grandchildren grow up through stolen photographs, missing birthdays, holidays, the simple joy of being a grandfather. I chose duty over love, and it's been the greatest mistake of my reign." Harry felt his carefully constructed anger beginning to crumble. He had come here expecting to confront an unyielding patriarch, but instead found a broken man who had sacrificed his own happiness for an institution that might not even survive his death. "Dad," Harry said softly, "we've both made mistakes. Perhaps," Charles replied, "but I'm the one with the power to fix them. The question is whether it's too late." As father and son continued their conversation, neither was aware that their words were being carefully monitored by palace officials who would soon face their own impossible choices. The monarchy stood at a crossroads, and the decisions made in the coming days would determine not just Harry's future, but the very survival of the House of Windsor in the modern world. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the audience room, as Harry and Charles continued their unprecedented conversation. What had begun as a formal meeting between a king and his estranged son had evolved into something much more profound. Charles had dozed briefly, the medication and emotional strain taking their toll, but had awakened with renewed determination to address the years of silence between them. "There's something else you need to know," Charles said, his voice gaining strength as if speaking these truths was somehow healing for him. "About the press coverage, the stories that painted Meghan in such a negative light." Harry felt his muscles tense. The media's treatment of his wife had been one of the primary reasons for their departure from royal life. The constant scrutiny, the racial undertones, the invasion of privacy that had reminded him too painfully of his mother's experience. The palace could have done more to protect her, Charles admitted. I know that now, but at the time I was advised that defending Meghan too vigorously would only inflame the situation. I was told that royal spouses had always faced intense scrutiny, that it was simply part of the role. She was pregnant, Harry said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. She was carrying your grandchild, and the stress from the attacks nearly broke her. Charles winced as if struck. I failed her. I failed you both. The institution I've spent my life preparing to lead became more important to me than the well-being of my own family members. Outside the palace, London was experiencing an unusually warm February day. Tourists gathered at the gates, phones raised to capture any glimpse of royal activity. Social media was already buzzing with speculation about Harry's presence in the country, though the palace had refused to confirm or deny reports of the meeting. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Meghan was facing her own crisis of conscience. She stood in the garden of their home watching Archie and Lilibet play on the swing set Harry had installed just months after their arrival in California. The children's laughter should have been comforting, but instead it highlighted the impossible position their family now faced. Her phone had been ringing constantly since news broke of Harry's trip to London. Reporters, former palace contacts, well-meaning friends all seeking information about her plans. Would she reconcile with the royal family? Was this the beginning of a return to royal duties? The questions were premature, but Meghan understood the world's fascination with their story. She thought about the conversation she'd had with Harry just before his departure. He had been torn between hope and skepticism, wanting desperately to believe that his father might finally be ready to bridge their divide. Meghan had encouraged the trip, but she had also prepared herself for the possibility that Harry would return more hurt than when he left. "Mommy, why does Daddy look sad when people ask about Grandpa Charles?" Archie had asked the night before. His innocent question had cut straight to the heart of their dilemma. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that his grandfather is one of the most powerful men in the world, yet can't seem to find time for a simple phone call? Back in the palace, Charles was sharing details about the monarchy's current state that painted a troubling picture. Public support for the royal family had declined significantly since the Queen's death. The younger generation, in particular, questioned the relevance of hereditary monarchy in the 21st century. Charles's illness had only accelerated these concerns, with many wondering if the institution could survive another transition. "William is doing his best," Charles said, referring to Harry's elder brother, "but he's carrying too much burden. The Prince of Wales, future king, father of 3, and now essentially running many of my duties while I receive treatment. He needs support." Harry felt a pang of guilt. Whatever their personal differences, William had always taken his royal responsibilities seriously. While Harry had been building his new life in California, his brother had been managing the weight of an entire institution's future. "How is he?" Harry asked. "Really, I mean, not the official statements." Charles considered the question carefully. "Exhausted, frustrated. He loves you, you know. He's never said so directly, but I can see it. He misses having his brother beside him." The revelation about William's feelings stirred complicated emotions in Harry. Their relationship had been damaged by years of disagreement about royal duties and personal choices. The last time they had spoken privately, angry words had been exchanged that neither had tried to repair. "The children ask about him," Harry admitted. "Archie remembers playing with George when they were younger. Lilibet doesn't understand why she can't meet her cousins." Charles's face brightened at the mention of his grandchildren. "I have videos, you know." Staff members who know how to use social media have shown me clips of them playing, Meghan's cooking demonstrations where they make appearances. Lilibet has Diana's smile. The comparison to Diana brought both men to emotional silence. Harry's mother had been gone for nearly 30 years, yet her presence still influenced every major family decision. She had wanted her sons to remain close, to support each other through the unique challenges of royal life. "She would be disappointed in all of us," Charles said quietly. "Diana always believed that family should come before duty, that love was more important than protocol. We've done exactly the opposite." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Sir Edward Young entered with obvious reluctance, carrying a folder that seemed to weigh heavily in his hands. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development that requires immediate attention." Charles gestured for him to continue, though Harry noticed his father's renewed wariness. Palace intrusions during personal moments had been a constant source of frustration throughout Charles's life. "There are reports that the Duchess of Sussex has been seen meeting with several prominent American media executives," Sir Edward said. "The speculation is that she's planning some kind of major announcement." Harry felt his stomach drop. He and Meghan had discussed various contingency plans before his departure, but a media blitz wasn't among them, unless something had changed dramatically since his arrival in London. "What kind of announcement?" Charles asked, though his tone suggested he feared the answer. "The reports are unconfirmed," Sir Edward replied diplomatically, "but there's speculation about a tell-all interview or documentary project, something that would give the Duchess's perspective on her time as a working royal and the family's treatment of her." The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. Another explosive interview, following the pattern of their conversation with Oprah Winfrey, could deliver a fatal blow to an already weakened monarchy. With Charles ill and public support declining, the institution couldn't survive another round of damaging revelations. Harry's mind raced. Meghan was fiercely protective of their family, but she was also strategic. She wouldn't launch a public attack without cause, unless she had learned something during his absence that changed her perspective on reconciliation. "I need to call her," Harry said, rising from his chair. "Perhaps," Charles said carefully, "it would be better to understand her concerns first." What might have prompted this reaction? Before Harry could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message from Meghan. The simple word sent a chill through his heart. "Check the news. We need to talk." Now, Charles noticed Harry's expression change. "What is it?" Harry quickly searched for recent news stories on his phone. What he found made his blood run cold. A British tabloid had published a story claiming to reveal inside sources, detailing private conversations between Harry and his father. The article quoted supposed palace insiders describing Harry as desperate for forgiveness and suggesting that his visit was financially motivated. "They're already spinning this," Harry said, showing his father the screen. "They're making it look like I came here because we're struggling financially, like I'm begging for support." Charles read the article with growing anger. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. Someone in this palace is feeding information to the press." The betrayal hit both men simultaneously. Their private reconciliation, the honest conversation they both needed for years, was being weaponized by unknown parties within the royal household. The institution that Charles led was actively sabotaging his relationship with his son. Harry's phone rang. Meghan's name appeared on the screen. "I have to take this," he said, stepping toward the window for privacy. "Harry!" Meghan's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing. The tabloid story?" "Yes, Meg. Please tell me you haven't done anything rash." "Rash?" Her voice rose slightly. "They're destroying you in the press while you're trying to rebuild a relationship with your father. How is protecting our family's reputation rash?" Harry could hear the children in the background, their innocent chatter a stark contrast to the adult drama unfolding around them. "What exactly have you done?" he asked. "I've scheduled interviews with 3 major American networks," Meghan said. "If they want to control the narrative about our family, then I'm going to make sure the truth gets told." Harry felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Support his wife's decision to fight back against unfair coverage, or try to protect the fragile reconciliation with his father that such interviews would certainly destroy. "Meghan, please, give me more time." "We were making progress." "Progress," she replied. "While you're having heart-to-heart conversations with your father, his staff is feeding lies to the press about our marriage, our finances, our children. This is exactly what happened before, Harry. Nothing has changed except now they're doing it while pretending to welcome you back." Charles had moved closer to the window, clearly straining to hear the conversation. When Harry met his father's eyes, he saw genuine distress there. "Can you give me 24 hours?" Harry asked Meghan. Let me figure out what's happening here before you go public. There was a long pause. 24 hours, Meghan finally agreed. But Harry, I won't let them destroy us again. If your family can't control their own staff, then I'll control our story myself. The call ended, leaving Harry staring out at the London skyline. Below, he could see photographers gathered outside the palace gates, their telephoto lenses trained on any window that might offer a glimpse of the reunited father and son. "We have a problem," Harry said, turning back to Charles. "Indeed we do," his father replied. "But perhaps we also have an opportunity." Charles's words puzzled Harry, but before he could ask for clarification, the king was already reaching for his phone to summon Sir Edward Young. Whatever his father had in mind, Harry sensed that the next 24 hours would determine whether the House of Windsor could survive the modern world's demands for transparency and authenticity. As evening descended over London, both men knew that their private reconciliation had become a public crisis that would require unprecedented action to resolve. The question was whether a dying king and his estranged son could move fast enough to prevent the complete collapse of everything they both claimed to value. The emergency meeting convened at 8 o'clock that evening in the palace's most secure conference room. Present were King Charles, Prince Harry, Sir Edward Young, and 2 other senior palace officials whose loyalty was beyond question. The mood was tense as they gathered around a mahogany table that had witnessed countless royal crises over the decades. Charles, despite his obvious fatigue, had insisted on personally leading the discussion. The afternoon's events had crystallized something in his mind about the future of the monarchy and his relationship with his son. The leak to the press had been the final straw in a pattern of institutional betrayal that he was no longer willing to tolerate. "Before we begin," Charles announced, "I want everyone to understand that what happens in this room tonight will determine whether the monarchy survives in any meaningful form. We are not here to manage another scandal. We are here to fundamentally change how this institution operates." Sir Edward shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As a career palace official, he had spent decades perfecting the art of damage control and careful messaging. The king's words suggested something far more radical than traditional crisis management. Harry watched his father with growing amazement. The frail man he had encountered that morning had been replaced by someone who seemed to draw strength from the crisis confronting them. Perhaps the prospect of losing his son forever had finally given Charles the courage to challenge the system he had inherited. "The leak came from within this building," Charles continued. "Someone on my staff, someone I trust with my most private moments, has been feeding information to hostile media outlets. This isn't just about today's story. I've been reviewing security reports, and there's evidence of a pattern going back months." The revelation sent a chill through the room. Palace staff were supposed to be absolutely loyal, vetted through extensive background checks and bound by strict confidentiality agreements. The idea that someone within the inner circle had been systematically betraying royal privacy was almost unthinkable. "Do we know who?" Harry asked. "We have suspicions," Sir Edward replied carefully. "But the investigation is ongoing. The individual or individuals involved have been quite careful to cover their tracks." Charles leaned forward, his eyes focusing intensely on each person in the room. "Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, I will personally call the editor of every major British publication and inform them that any further stories based on palace leaks will result in a complete cessation of royal cooperation with their organizations. No more exclusive access, no more official photographs, no more briefings of any kind." The officials around the table exchanged worried glances. The British press had enjoyed a symbiotic relationship with the royal family for generations. Cutting off that access would be unprecedented and potentially catastrophic for both sides. "Your Majesty," one of the advisors began hesitantly, "such a dramatic step could be interpreted as the monarchy becoming even more secretive and out of touch. The public might not respond well to what appears to be an attempt to control press coverage." "The public," Charles replied with surprising firmness, "is tired of having their royal family's private moments turned into entertainment. They want authenticity, not manufactured drama. We're going to give them exactly that." Harry felt a stirring of hope for the first time since the afternoon's crisis had erupted. His father was finally showing the kind of decisive leadership that the monarchy had needed for years.
"There's more," Charles continued.
"I've been thinking about succession planning, about what happens when my time comes to an end. William will be an excellent king, but he shouldn't have to face these same institutional problems. We need to reform how the royal household operates before I'm gone." The conversation continued late into the evening, covering everything from media relations to staff loyalty to the fundamental question of the monarchy's role in modern Britain. Harry found himself contributing ideas based on his experience living outside the royal bubble, offering perspectives that the career palace officials had never considered. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Meghan was dealing with her own crisis of conscience. The promised interviews were scheduled for the following afternoon, but something about her conversation with Harry had left her unsettled. She had been prepared to go to war with the royal family, but Harry's description of his father's vulnerability had complicated her emotions. She sat in their home office reviewing the notes she had prepared for the interviews. Her grievances were legitimate: the lack of support during her pregnancy, the failure to protect her from racist coverage, the way the institution had prioritized its image over her family's well-being. These weren't petty complaints, but serious issues that deserved public attention. Yet she also understood that going public now might destroy whatever progress Harry was making with his father. Charles was dying, and this might be their last chance to heal the wounds that had divided their family for so many years. Was her desire for justice worth sacrificing that possibility? Her phone buzzed with a message from one of her closest friends, a successful businesswoman who had advised her through many difficult decisions over the years. "Whatever you decide tomorrow, make sure it's something you can live with for the rest of your life. Revenge feels good in the moment, but reconciliation lasts forever." Back in London, Harry was experiencing his own moment of clarity. As the meeting wrapped up around midnight, his father had asked him to stay behind for a private conversation. They were alone in the conference room, surrounded by the weight of royal history and the uncertainty of an unknown future. "I want to ask you something," Charles said, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." Harry nodded, preparing himself for another difficult revelation. "If I were to offer you a way back into the family, a role that would allow you to serve the monarchy while still maintaining your independence, would you consider it?" The question caught Harry completely off guard. He had come to London seeking reconciliation, but hadn't dared hope for a return to royal duties. The possibility opened up scenarios he had tried not to imagine: his children growing up knowing their royal heritage, working alongside William again, contributing to causes he cared about, with the platform that royal status provided. "What kind of role?" he asked cautiously. "Something new," Charles replied, "a position that acknowledges the mistakes we've made while offering you the chance to help reform the institution from within. You and Meghan have learned things about public service, about connecting with people, that the rest of us have forgotten." Harry thought about Meghan, about their life in California, about the children who had grown up thinking of themselves as private citizens rather than royals. Would it be fair to disrupt their peaceful existence for the sake of institutional duty? "I would need to discuss it with Meghan," Harry said. "And any arrangement would have to include protection for our family, real protection, not just promises." "Of course," Charles agreed. "I wouldn't expect you to make such a decision lightly. But Harry, I need you to understand something. The monarchy is facing its greatest crisis in generations. We need people who understand both tradition and change, who can help us navigate between preserving what's valuable and adapting to modern realities." As they spoke, both men were aware that time was running out. Charles's health, the scheduled interviews, the ongoing press speculation all created pressure for quick decisions. Yet they also understood that rushing into arrangements that hadn't been carefully considered would only create new problems. "There's something else," Charles said. "I want to invite Meghan and the children to visit. Officially, with full security, full recognition of their status, and a formal apology for how she was treated before." And Harry felt his heart skip. The gesture would mean everything to Meghan, a public acknowledgement that she had been wronged and deserved better from the institution she had tried so hard to serve. "When?" Harry asked. "As soon as she's ready," Charles replied. "I don't have unlimited time, and I want to know my grandchildren. I want them to understand that they're loved and wanted, regardless of their parents' complicated relationship with royal duty." The offer was more generous than Harry had dared hope for, but it also came with enormous complications. If Meghan proceeded with the planned interviews, such an invitation would be impossible. The public revelation of family conflicts would make any kind of reconciliation politically untenable. As Harry returned to his hotel room in the early hours of the morning, he knew he faced the most important phone call of his life. He had to convince Meghan that their family's future lay not in public confrontation with the royal family, but in private reconciliation that might eventually lead to public service. The success or failure of that conversation would determine not just their family's destiny, but the future of the British monarchy itself. As dawn broke over London, Harry prepared to make the case for forgiveness over justice, for hope over anger, for a future that neither he nor Meghan had imagined when they first decided to step away from royal life. The next few hours would test everything they had built together and everything they believed about second chances, family loyalty, and the possibility of redemption even in the most complicated circumstances. The weight of 1,000 years of royal history rested on a phone call between a husband and wife who had already sacrificed so much for their right to choose their own path. Harry stood at the window of his London hotel room at 5 a.m, watching the city wake up below. The Thames reflected the early morning light, and somewhere in the distance, Big Ben chimed the hour. In a few hours, Meghan would either cancel her scheduled interviews or proceed with revelations that would end any chance of reconciliation with his family forever. He had rehearsed this phone call a dozen times in his mind, but every version felt inadequate. How do you ask someone to give up their chance for justice? How do you convince the person you love most to trust an institution that has repeatedly betrayed that trust? The phone rang 3 times before Meghan answered. Despite the early hour in California, her voice was alert. She had probably been awake all night, preparing for the interviews that would give her the chance to finally tell her side of the story. "Harry," she said, and he could hear both love and exhaustion in her voice. "How did the rest of your meeting go?" "Meg, I need you to hear me out completely before you say anything," Harry began. "What I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, but I think we have a real chance to fix this." He told her everything: his father's health, the genuine remorse Charles had expressed, the offer of a formal apology and invitation for her and the children to visit, and, most importantly, the possibility of a new kind of role within the royal family that would allow them to serve while maintaining their independence. Meghan listened in silence, and Harry found himself holding his breath as he waited for her response. "You're asking me to trust them again," she said finally. "After everything they've done to us, to our children, you're asking me to believe that this time will be different." "I'm asking you to trust me," Harry replied. "I've seen something in my father that I've never seen before. The illness, the isolation, losing his mother and now facing his own mortality, it's changed him. He's finally ready to put family before institution." "And what about William? What about the rest of them?" "Your father might be ready to change, but that doesn't mean the entire system will." It was a fair question, and one Harry had been wrestling with himself. William wasn't part of yesterday's conversations, but Dad thinks he's ready for reconciliation too. He's been carrying too much burden alone. As for the rest of the institution, that's exactly why they need us. They need people who understand both sides, who can help them modernize without losing what's valuable about tradition. Meghan was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "What about the children? Archie and Lilibet have built their identities around being normal kids. If we go back, that changes everything for them." "It doesn't have to," Harry said. "That's the beauty of what Dad is proposing. We could split our time, keep our home in California, but also have a role in the UK. The children could grow up understanding their heritage without being trapped by it. And the press? The same media that has spent years attacking me? Dad is planning to cut off cooperation with any outlet that continues publishing leaked stories or unfair coverage. He's serious about protecting us this time." Meghan sighed deeply. "Harry, I've already committed to these interviews. The networks have cleared their schedules, promoted the appearances. If I cancel now, it looks like the palace pressured me into silence." This was the moment Harry had been dreading. He understood the impossible position Meghan was in, but he also knew that proceeding with the interviews would make reconciliation politically impossible for his father. "What if we offered them something better?" Harry asked. "What if, instead of an interview about past grievances, You could announce that you're accepting an invitation to return to the UK as honored members of the royal family. You're asking me to gamble our family's reputation on promises from people who have broken every promise they've ever made to us. I'm asking you to bet on us, Harry replied. On our strength as a couple, on our ability to handle whatever comes next together. We've survived everything they've thrown at us so far. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting for change from within. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Harry could hear Archie and Lilibet in the background, getting ready for school. Their young voices a reminder of everything at stake. "If I do this," Meghan said finally, "if I cancel the interviews and trust your father's promises, I need guarantees. Real ones, not just words." "What kind of guarantees?" "A written agreement about our roles, our security, our children's privacy. A formal apology that acknowledges the harm that was done. And most importantly, immediate action against whoever has been leaking our private information to the press." Harry felt hope rising in his chest. "I think we can get all of that. There's one more thing," Meghan added. "I want to bring my mother with us when we visit. Doria has watched this family put me through hell, and she deserves to see that they're capable of treating her daughter with respect." "Done," Harry said immediately. "Anything else?" "Just one question. Are you sure this is what you want? Not what you think you should want, not what would make your father happy, but what Harry Sussex wants for his life." The question cut to the heart of Harry's internal struggle. For 6 years, he had been building an identity separate from his royal heritage. He had found success, happiness, and purpose as a private citizen. Was he ready to give that up for the uncertainty of royal duty? "I want our children to know their grandfather before it's too late," Harry said. "I want to honor my mother's memory by healing the divisions she would have hated. And yes, I want to use whatever platform we have to make a difference in the world. If we can do that while keeping our family intact and strong, then yes, this is what I want." "Okay," Meghan said, "I'll cancel the interviews. But Harry, if this goes wrong, if they betray us again, we're done. No more second chances. No more trying to fix what might be fundamentally broken." "Understood," Harry replied. "Meg, I love you for doing this. I love you too. Now go make sure your father understands that this is his last chance to get this right." The call ended, and Harry immediately dialed his father's private number. Despite the early hour, Charles answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting for Harry's call. "Dad, she's willing to try," Harry said without preamble. "But she has conditions." Over the next hour, they worked through the details of Meghan's requirements. To Harry's surprise, Charles agreed to everything without argument. The king seemed to understand that this was indeed his last chance to repair his relationship with his son and daughter-in-law. "I'll have the formal documents prepared today," Charles said. "And Harry, I want you to know how grateful I am that you're both willing to give us another chance." By noon London time, the news had broken. Instead of explosive interviews attacking the royal family, American media outlets were reporting that the Duchess of Sussex had decided to accept a personal invitation from King Charles for a family reconciliation visit. The announcement included news of a formal role being created for both Harry and Meghan within the royal family's charitable work. The reaction was immediate and intense. British tabloids that had spent years attacking Meghan suddenly found themselves praising her grace and forgiveness. American media celebrated her decision to choose healing over revenge. Social media exploded with debates about whether the royal family deserved this second chance. More importantly, the announcement seemed to energize King Charles in a way that surprised his doctors. For the first time in months, he appeared genuinely hopeful about the future. 3 weeks later, Meghan stepped off a private jet at Heathrow Airport with Archie, Lilibet, and her mother Doria. Harry was there to meet them, along with a security detail that had been personally selected and vetted by Charles himself. The children's excitement was infectious as they caught their first glimpse of the country their father called home. Archie peppered Harry with questions about everything from double-decker buses to the Tower of London. Lilibet, more cautious but equally curious, held tightly to her mother's hand while taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. At Buckingham Palace, King Charles waited in the same audience room where he and Harry had begun their reconciliation. But this time, the formal chairs had been replaced with comfortable sofas, and a child-sized table with art supplies had been set up near the window. When Meghan entered the room, both she and Charles seemed to understand that this moment would define everything that followed. He rose slowly from his chair and walked toward her, his steps careful but determined. "Meghan," he said, "I owe you an apology that is long overdue. I failed to protect you when you needed protection most, and I allowed my fears about the institution to override my responsibilities as a father-in-law and grandfather." Meghan looked at this frail man who wielded such enormous power, yet seemed so vulnerable in this moment. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "It means more than you know." What followed was not the fairy tale reunion that the media would later describe, but something more real and more valuable. It was the beginning of a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than royal protocol, on shared commitment to family rather than institutional duty. Archie approached his grandfather with the fearless curiosity of childhood, asking if he really lived in a castle and whether he had seen any dragons. Charles's face lit up as he knelt to his grandson's level and began telling stories about the palace's history, adapted for a 7-year-old's imagination. Lilibet remained more reserved, but when Charles gently asked if she would like to see the garden where her grandmother Diana used to walk, something shifted in the little girl's expression. She took his offered hand and allowed him to lead her toward the window, chattering about the flowers they could grow together. As Harry watched his children connecting with their grandfather and saw Meghan beginning to relax in the presence of the man who had caused her so much pain, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine hope for his family's future. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more difficult conversations, more moments when the weight of royal duty would conflict with personal desires. But for the first time since his wedding day, Harry believed that love might actually be stronger than tradition, that healing might be possible even in the most complicated circumstances. Outside the palace windows, London continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that history was being quietly rewritten in a sunlit room where a dying king was finally learning to be a grandfather, and a fractured family was discovering that some bonds, no matter how strained, could never truly be broken. The royal guards remained at their posts, their faces expressionless as always, but if they had been asked, they might have said that something had changed in the palace that day. The silence felt different, warmer somehow, as if the ancient walls themselves were relieved that the long winter of family discord was finally beginning to thaw.